Part 6. The Lapland Woman and the Finland Woman. They stopped at a little hut. A wretched hut it was. The roof was very nearly touched the ground, and the door was so low that whoever wished to go either in or out was obligated to crawl upon hands and knees. No one was home except the old Lapland woman, who was busy boiling fish over a lamp filled with train oil. The reindeer related to her Gerda's whole history, not, however, till after he had made her acquainted with his own, which appeared to him of much more importance. Poor Gerda, meanwhile, was so overpowered by the cold that she could not speak.
Poor things, said the Lapland woman. You still have a long way before you. You have 100 miles to run before you can arrive in Finland. The Snow Queen dwells there and burns blue lights every evening. I will write you a few words on a piece of dried stockfish. Paper. I have none. And you may take it with you to the wise Finland woman who lives there. She will advise you better than I will.
So when Gerda had well warmed herself and taken some food, the Lapland woman wrote a few words on a dried stockfish, bade Gerda take care of it, and bound her once more firmly on the reindeer's back. Onwards they sped, the wondrous northern lights, now of the loveliest, brightest blue color, shone all through the night, and amidst these splendid illuminations they arrived in Finland, and knocked at the chimney of the wise woman, for door to her house she had none. Hot, very hot was then, so much so that the wise woman wore scarcely any clothing. She was low in stature and very dirty. She immediately loosened little Gerda's dress, and took off the fur boots and thick gloves, and laid a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, and then read what was written on the stockfish. She read it 3 times. After the third reading she threw it by the fire, and threw the fish into the porridge pot, for it might take a very excellent supper, and she never wasted anything. Thou art so powerful, continued the reindeer, that I know thou canst twist all the winds of the world into a thread, of which, if pilots loosen one knot, he will have a favourite wind. If you loosen the second, it will blow sharp, and if you loosen the third, a tremendous storm will arise that the trees of the forest will be uprooted and the ship wrecked. Wilt thou not mix for this little maiden that wonderful draught which will give her the strength of 12 men, and thus enable her to overcome the Snow Queen?
The strength of 12 men, replied the old woman. That would be so much use to sure.
And she walked away and drew forth a large parchment roll from a shelf, and began to read. What strange characters were inscribed on the scroll as the wise woman slowly unrolled it. She read so intently that the perspiration ran down her forehead. But the reindeer pleaded so earnestly for little Gerda, and Gerda's eyes were raised so entreatingly and tearfully, that at last the wise woman's eyes began to twinkle again out of sympathy, and she drew the reindeer into the corner, putting a fresh piece of ice upon his head, whispered thus:
Little Kay is still with the white Snow Queen, in whose abode everything is according to his taste, and therefore he believes it is his best place to be in the world. But that is because he has a glass splinter in his heart, and a glass splinter in his eye. Till he has got rid of them, he will never feel like a human being, and the Snow Queen will always maintain her influence over him.
But canst thou not give something to little Gerda whereby she may overcome these evil influences?
I can give her no power so great as that which she already possesses. Seest thou not how strong she is? Seest thou not both men and animals must serve her? A poor little girl wandering barefoot through the world. Her power is greater than ours. It proceeds from her heart, and her being a loving and innocent child. If this power she already possesses cannot give her access to Snow Queen's palace, and enable her to free Kay's eyes and heart from the glass fragments, we can do nothing for her. 2 miles hence, in the Snow Queen's garden, thither thou canst marry the little maiden. Put her down close to the bush, bearing red berries and half covered with snow. Lose no time, and hasten back to this place.
Then the wise woman lifted Gerda on the reindeer's back, and away they went. "Oh, I've left my boots behind! I've left my gloves behind!" cried little Gerda, when it was too late. The cold was piercing, but the reindeer dared not stop. He ran until he reached the bush with the red berries. Here he set Gerda down, kissed her, the tears rolling down his cheeks for a while, and he ran back fast again, which was the best thing he could do. And there stood poor Gerda, without shoes, without gloves, alone in that barren region, that terribly icy cold Finland. She ran on as fast as she could. A whole regiment of snowflakes came to meet her. They did not fall from the sky, which was cloudless and bright as the northern lights. They ran straight along the ground, and the farther Gerda advanced, the larger they grew. Gerda then remembered how large and curious the snowflakes had appeared to her when one day she had looked at them through the burning glass. These, however, were very much larger. They were living forms, that they were in fact the Snow Queen's guards. Their shapes were the strangest that could be imagined. Some looked like ugly porcupines, others like snakes rolled up into knots with their heads peering forth, and others like little fat bears with bristling hairs. All, however, were alike in dazzling white. All were living snowflakes. Little Gerda began to repeat, "Our Father." Meanwhile, the cold was so intense that she could see her own breath, which, as it escaped her, ascended into the air like a vapor. The cold grew intense, the vapor more dense, and at length she took the forms of little bright angels, which, as they touched the earth, became larger and more distinct. They wore helmets on their heads, and carried shields and spears in their hands. Their numbers increased so rapidly by the time Gerda had finished her prayer. The whole legion stood around her. They thrust their spears against the horrible snowflakes, which fell into thousands of pieces. And little Gerda walked on unhurt and undaunted. The angels touched her hands and feet, and then she scarcely felt the cold, and boldly approached the Snow Queen's palace. But before her company were there, let us see what Kay is doing. He is certainly not thinking of little Gerda. Least of all can he imagine that she is now standing at the palace gates,